I am Andy Steele. I'm an associate. I've been with Arup 8 years, and prior to that, 25 years plus in operations. I specialise in life science and logistics, and have done operational readiness sessions and projects for life science clients and some government agencies as well. So I'm joined by my colleagues, David and Danielle. So I'll hand over to David.
Morning, everybody. Yes, hi, my name's David Randall, and I've been part of Arup's operations consulting team for the past 10 years or so. I specialise in operational readiness, so that's bringing assets, facilities, buildings from a static state of construction through to a dynamic live state of operation. And I do this for government authorities like National Highways right through to local government, such as Luton Borough Council. And I'll hand that over to Danielle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle. I'm a logistics consultant in the same team as Andy and David. I've been at Arup for 2 years now, and across that, I've worked on various operational readiness projects, particularly a pharmaceuticals one, but also some work in the property and real estate sectors.
Thank you, Danielle. Before we move on, I'm going to explain how the session is going to work. So you'll hear from each of us. We'll introduce the concept of what operational readiness is all about, and then there'll be an interactive section later on where we'll be asking you to help us match some of the questions that we've got for you, just to test how we've got on, how we conveyed the message. So there will be opportunities for you to participate. Obviously, if you've got any questions, please pop those in the chat or come back to you. We'll be happy to answer them. But the aim is for this session to run for around 40 minutes, and then we'll give an opportunity for any other questions at the end. So without further ado, let's move on. So today we're going to cover what is operational readiness. We'll do an explanation on the next slide on that one. We're also going to look at why we should consider operational readiness, why we should invest in operational readiness, and we're going to look at what does operational readiness look like. So operational readiness is an investment required for turning assets into fully functioning facility or service. In other words, it's how you take something from an idea into a live operation. And that can involve many different aspects, particularly the people, the processes, and the assets. You will have heard phrases such as soft landings. That is not operational readiness. So anyone that talks to you about soft landings is referring to something that happens after a building is complete or a facility is open. That's looking at the success of how the project went and the customer satisfaction. Operational readiness actually focuses on at the design stage to ensure that things open successfully. So in this session, we're going to be looking in more detail at the processes, people, and assets. There are other streams to it, but these are the kind of key areas that we're going to look at today.
So operational readiness as a concept stems from the aviation sector and the recognition that an airport or a terminal building or a part of a terminal is a very complex system of processes and assets that all need to work together in order to fully deliver that service. And operational readiness really came to the fore in the early 2000s when it wasn't done correctly at Heathrow Terminal 5. And for many people on this call may remember it, there was complete pandemonium. And the aviation sector almost collectively vowed never to happen again and to spend much more time and emphasis, not just on the build, but also the transition from that static state of construction through to that dynamic state of operation. And in the past 20 years, I think there's been an acknowledgement actually that a lot of those approaches could be taken and applied to other sectors, albeit probably on a smaller scale, but still sticking to the core framework of what's important, why, how can this really help de-risk the opening of assets. So to give you a quick example on a project I did recently with Luton Borough Council, we were tasked with opening a new bus and taxi rank, very small asset. There were just space for two buses and a few taxis. So from a project management perspective, that might seem very simple. Design the new rank, prepare for the construction, get it built and open it. But actually, when you start to unpick it and view it through those three lenses of people, processes and assets, you start to realize all the plethora of activity that goes around just the build. So on people, it might be ensuring that the bus drivers are informed about the new routes and the additional stop, and how to and are they trained on how to use the two new bus bays? Are the taxi companies informed ahead of time that this facility is available for use, and given appropriate information on opening and closing times, for example? On the process front, it might be about what to do if there's an incident at the bus station. How is that handled, and do all the parties involved know their individual responsibilities, and have they practiced them? And then on the asset front, are there new assets apart from just the bus station? Is there new CCTV that needs to be fully tested to ensure that there are no blind spots, for example? So it's taking that system-wide view with the ambition of really eliminating any of that risk on day one, which can lead to, as Danielle will come on to talking about, a number of risks.
So on that, we're kind of going to look at some of the risks that could occur if you don't consider operational readiness ahead of a change or a new opening. So as we can see here, you potentially are going to have delays, which can either come with or in addition to spiraling costs. And alongside that, there might be regulatory compliance issues and reputational risks. And this kind of reputational risk is a big one, because it's very challenging to change any preconceptions or the first impression of a service on that opening day. So it's very important to kind of get ahead of that and keep that in check. And then we've got the other side of the coin, which is if you do invest in operational readiness and consider these issues early, you're more likely to spot things before opening day and be able to rectify them so that your opening can go ahead exactly as you plan. You'll have an integrated approach where your teams know what to expect, they know how to work with each other, know how the system's going to operate. This will all mean that you'll have a more resilient operation, and overall will hopefully be able to minimize any unforeseen costs or delays.
So now we're going to reach the interactive part of the session. So we're going to learn together. We're going to look through some exercises. We're going to look at a particular project. We're going to present that aspect of a project and ask you to contribute to the completion of the mapping or matching exercise. So we're going to give a task. Then we're going to go into talking about a sort of live, real life example. And then we'll get to the point where we're going to have some things on the screen that we're going to ask you to read, and we'll talk you through that. We'll work through it together. So in this instance, your task is that you are a project manager for Hertfordshire County Council. You've been tasked with the opening of a recycling centre. The design has been completed, which has involved consultation with stakeholders, including the site operatives. The construction contractor will soon be selected, and you've now got 4 months until the work on site begins.
Great. So to provide a bit more context behind this example, we wanted to bring a case study to life which resonates with the people on this call. We thought, do we choose a new leisure centre, a new playground, a new council office building, but one that we're sure that everyone is familiar with in their own context is household recycling centres. And the one we picked this isn't an operational readiness project we worked on, but we thought this was an interesting example to work through. Is one in a town in Hertfordshire, about 30 miles north of London, called Berkhamsted. This waste centre serves about 30,000 people from the town and a few neighbouring villages. And in terms of the broader context, you can see it's marked in a blue dot there. This is right in the centre of town, so lots of residents nearby, with lots of considerations associated with that. Local businesses, because it's on an industrial estate. The site neighbours some train lines, so there's stakeholders with Network Rail and train operating companies. There's a river nearby, for example. So very typical in terms of a complex site with lots of constraints that need to be considered. Move on. Next slide, please.
So we're just going to look at some of the kind of changes that were made or are planning to be made to the existing site. So what they have done is they've extended it by around 600 square meters, and this was through removing the kind of waste vegetation area at the entrance to the site and pulling the entrance towards the road to create some more space. And then we've also internally, we've changed the layout of the road. So this reconfiguration has allowed space for an extra 5 bins by creating one curved lane for the vehicles to go around rather than 2 straight lanes. Some other kind of changes that have occurred were some safety upgrades. So we've got new bollards here with some extra white paint to make it clearer. We've got the additional parking spaces, which makes it more efficient. We've added new gates, new CCTV, new ANPR systems to improve the security. And then we've also updated the staff welfare area to give them a new site office. So this is kind of a summary for a visual change of what's occurred. So this is the original layout with the 2 lanes at the back. And you can see that now the vehicles pull in a circular route and can go out all in one lane. And this has allowed the extra skips. And yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to get into the bit where we ask you to participate, please. So we're going to look at the processes, the assets and the people in greater depth. And there's some examples here on the screen. And what we're going to do is read out the one on the left and then ask you to type in the chat the letter of the answer that you think is appropriate. And in this instance, there may be more than one answer correct for each one. Now, these are just some examples. This isn't an exhaustive list. Everything that we're going to do on this and the following slides is a selection to give you a flavour and an introduction to what this is all about. So for number 1, the access gate was manual before and it's now automated. Which procedure or procedures do we think would need to be updated or written to support that? If you could please type your answers in the chat, that'd be great. Okay, so we've got D, we've got B, D, and E. Give it one more moment. Okay, we'll go straight on to, thank you, Dan. So D and E, the ones we mapped. However, as we said, there may be more than one correct answer. Brilliant, thank you. So on to the next one, which is the muster point in escape groups will have changed. What procedures would need to be updated or procedure would need to be updated if the muster point in escape group has changed? Okay, so the answer, Danielle, is A, the fire evacuation procedure. On to the third one is The new CCTVs to be installed covering the new critical area. Which procedure would need to be updated there? Thank you. Mark, thanks, Eve. Okay. Okay, yeah, some of the ones that being the additional ones you're saying. So yeah, we could definitely on this one, we've selected security, but also do take the point that maintenance procedures for looking after the CCTV system would also be important. So thank you for that. And the last one is disabled parking bays now in a different location. And I don't think it would take too much to work out which one this might be, but do appreciate your contributions. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, interesting point. We've got F's and C's. So yeah, in this instance, for this example, it is F and C. Superb. Thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to talking about the trialing of assets. David.
Yeah, great. So and the process you've just been through with Andy of kind of thinking about changes to site operations, that obviously typically happens quite early on in the process, perhaps after the design's been finalised and whilst construction is being sort of prepared. When as the program progresses and all the typical construction management activities are happening, there's then an opportunity alongside that to make use of the downtime. So in this case, the site was shut for 8 weeks in November and December. Make use of that time to train the staff on what they're on how they need to do these new operations, and then do what we call proving trials. And proving trials differ from testing and commissioning, which some of you may be familiar with. This happens after the assets have been signed off as fit for purpose, and this is more about how can the operatives use a collection of assets together in order to complete their responsibilities. So again, we haven't given you the answers this time, but please sort of come off mute if you feel comfortable and help share some ideas. So we'll give you the first one. So for electric gates, we think that there's a need to train staff on how to use them. That may not be an obligation of the contractor who installs them to actually deliver that training. So often that falls with operational readiness. And secondly, as I just mentioned, we need to prove that these gates work both in a normal context when they're actually operating properly, and also the staff know what to do, have a contingency in the event that they work, and that they can prove and evidence that they know how to override the gates, for example. So that's what a trial would act to show. So another asset, there might be some additional skips or containers on site, as Danielle mentioned. What type of potential training or trialing do we think we might need to do around the new skips? Kim.
The team that are working on site need to understand which skips are for what items, how that they will be supporting customers to move around the site with their various items, how the skips are going to be emptied.
Yeah, all of that is definitely
emergency procedures if someone falls into your skip.
Yeah,
great.
No, it's good point. Thank you.
All of that sort of stuff.
Mark.
I think some of that was covered down, but looking, if it's a replication of those skips there, probably accessibility issues. The stairs going up. I'm taking a literal example there.
No,
Yeah.
no, that's definitely a good point as well. Has that been considered? Is there a process in place for assisting visitors with accessibility needs, for example? Yeah, so in this context, everything you've said is correct. And particularly what you said, Kim, around can we actually get these skips in and out? The design is all well and good, but actually testing the space in reality and practice is very important. So site signage and things like that. What might we want to trial, for example? Kirsty.
If they can be read by everyone, so for example, if there's colours on them, if people that are colourblind, can they actually see them, or what do they look like to them? So make sure like the contrast is right. So basically, accessibility with signage.
Yeah, visually impaired. That's great as well. Accessibility, brilliant. All really good stuff. Signage is an area where projects always slip up. There's and we always have to come in a few weeks before opening and make some changes, order some new signs, because invariably until a space is built and it's and you can sort of experience being in it, you realize that a site might be mounted at the wrong height, or or the text is too small to read, as you say. So in terms of specific trials, can a visitor use them? And in this context, what we typically do is get someone who's not very close to the project, potentially volunteers, to come in and provide their feedback, see if they can use the site as it was intended to, and get feedback. And if they can't, through that trial, understand what to do, then perhaps we need to go back to the drawing board and think about how that can be improved. If there's an incident, have we proved that additional signage can be deployed to tell people that there's a spill of chemicals, or that the site's closed, for example? And then finally, do we need to provide extra signage to really hammer home messages on day one? So those are all things operational readiness might consider. Defibrillators, any thoughts on training? Yeah, replacement of pads, I saw in the chat. Reporting procedures, exactly. All great stuff coming through the chat. Thank you for your contributions. Clear positioning. Yeah, so those are the sorts of things we had as well. Have people been trained? Is the location optimal? For defibrillators, whilst we'd hope a contractor would come in and do all the final commissioning, making sure that the defibs added to the national register, or that the pads, or that it's fully charged and connected to the power, it's always good to have a second layer of assurance just to check that that has been done correctly, so that we don't get into any compliance issues. Let's rattle through the next few. So new site office. It's amazing how the little things are often overlooked, like has a kettle been put in the office? It's obviously not a responsibility of a contractor to ensure that's there, but it's something that the staff would definitely expect to have sat in the corner of the room on day one. Can they log onto their computer? Has the network been configured correctly in the desk? Doing all those checks and balances as part of these trials, and ensuring that they can use those systems ahead of day one. Skip locations, I think we've already kind of talked about some of this stuff. Can the vehicles get into park in front of them? Can the skips be removed by the waste contractors? Going in and doing a full end-to-end trial where you put an empty skip down and pick a full skip up, and ensuring that that is working properly is so obviously in this context incredibly important. CCTV, training people how to use it, and testing that there's proper coverage, all very important. There might also be a need to train people on, are they familiar with GDPR procedures, and do they know what the site procedures are in relation to whether or not CCTV can be recorded. And finally, ANPR. Do we need to pre-register vehicles if the site operatives have their own vehicles that they're bringing to site every day, so that they don't get pinged for too much entry, and are the readers operating correctly? All of that stuff, as I keep saying, might get lightly tested in the testing and commissioning period, but doing that rigorous secondary testing in that real life scenario is really what operational readiness is all about.
We're now going to look at the readiness of people. So people have kind of come into both of the previous activities and how they operate the assets and how they understand and can implement the processes. But we're now going to look a bit at the different kind of stakeholders involved and people that have to be considered at different kind of stages of the process. So on the left, we've got a list of stakeholders. So we've got the local residents, the council comms team, the leadership from the council, emergency services, site operatives, the nominated waste contractor, the construction contractor, and any local business owners. And we would like to think about how they need to be consulted or involved in some of the operational readiness or pre-opening activities that occur. So as an example, for the first one, there's 5 kind of different stakeholders. This potentially isn't limited to these, but can include these 5 kind of groups. So we've got the site operatives, the council, the emergency services, the construction contractor, and the waste contractor all have to be involved with the design of the updated layout of the site, but also familiar with it and understanding how it's going to work in practice, particularly, for example, the site operatives and the waste contractor. They need to have done familiarization and be involved in those kind of trials so that on day one they know where to go and what to do. So with that in mind, who do we think needs to be involved with the kind of understanding of when the work's going to be completed? So either involved in that decision making or aware of it for reference. You can put the letters in the chat, please. Any ideas? A, B, E, F, and G. So that would be the local residents, the council comms, the waste contractor, and the construction contractor, which are all things I think we've considered too. So yeah, we've got the waste contractor, the construction contractor. They're both going to be involved in knowing the dates that they can get the equipment in and they can finish the construction. And then it will be the responsibility of the council comms team to communicate that out to the local residents and also local business owners where necessary. So similarly now, who needs to be informed about the site closure and alternative centres to use? So for this one, we've got everyone pretty much, We've highlighted in particular the local residents, any business owners nearby, and also the comms team, as they'll be the ones responsible for making sure that information gets out to the right people at the right time. And also that any updates are kind of sent out so that everybody's aware of what's going on. The next one is more about the training. So who do we want to make sure is trained on the updates that we discussed before? So it's not just about writing them, but also making sure that they are trained. E and F. Yeah, we've gone for E, F, but we've also put in the emergency services, as if there's any procedures that they have a role in or are involved in any way. They need to be aware of any changes and check that they kind of understand and can follow that. Who will need to review, but most importantly, sign off on a staffing model that validates that they can cope with the increased capacity of the new centre. C, correct. You've gone for that too. And then finally, who are the kind of key parties that we'd want involved in an operational readiness steering group to make sure that all the activities are kind of done in advance? Yeah, we've gone for quite a few too. We've gone for the leadership, the site operatives, the emergency services in particular, and the waste contractor. So all the kind of key people that are going to be involved in the operations from day one.
Great. So one final exercise for about 7 minutes, and which leaves us time for about 15 minutes of Q&A. So we've, in those exercises, talked about what the specific activities are in terms of writing the procedures, developing the training, conducting the trialing, interfacing with stakeholders, and and providing that overarching operational leadership. For this final activity, what we want to do is to just think about when is a good time to complete those activities, to ensure that they're done suitably far in advance. Obviously, you might say all of this stuff should be done 8 months before opening, but in reality, we know that that's not the case. Certain decisions can never be made that far in advance. So this exercise is a little bit subjective. But yeah, we're keen to know your thoughts on when you think we should be doing or starting to think about doing each of these activities. So we've got that timeline that you can see in the center of the screen: design, preparing for construction, and preparing for opening. In particular, that last phase, preparing for opening, we often recommend on projects that we work on or are asked to provide comment on, to provide a sort of transitionary period. Once all the build work's completed, once the assets are all finished and tested and commissioned, to do that final readiness preparation. I don't want to give away the answers too much, but that's the point at which we think you've got your kit back and and you're just making sure that you're comfortable with using it. So what we'd like you to do is we've got 4 of these activities along the top, which we think might be quite good to do early on in the sort of design phase, 4 that might fit in that sort of pre-build phase, 4 that you might operational activities you might wish to do in construction, and then 4 that you might wish to do in that final readiness phase. So thinking about design, which ones might sit quite nicely in that period? H, we've got in the chat. Kim, you've said
Ox.
so. Before we can deliver the training and the trialing on the process, obviously we need to write the processes, and we can only really do that once the design is shaping up. So that's definitely an early activity. H and M. So we've said yes to H. We think that is obviously important to get all of your stakeholders aligned as early as possible. M, negotiate usage of nearby sites. Perhaps that might come a little later in the process. If you can do it up front, that would be even better. And producing an operational risk register. So once the design's made, we can probably do a fairly good job at identifying what all the potential hazards might be with operating that new site, get them documented so that we can seek to address them through process and training and mitigate those risks as much as possible. And then we might want to have an indicative date for when we want to get this thing open at the early stage. Now moving on to that next phase where design's completed, we've received planning permission. What might be tasks that we might be able to do in that period? Jay, you've said, Kim, draft comms for residents. Yes, I think that's definitely one of them.
Yeah.
Any more?
Yeah, we've got B,
P and B.
for Mark.
Procure new waste containers.
Yeah, there could be long lead times on those.
So what we've gone for, develop the training with the view that we might wish to do the training during the sort of 2 months downtime during construction. As you've said, procure the waste containers. As you've also said, draft the comms for residents, and then negotiate usage of nearby sites. That sort of goes hand in hand with the comms for residents. If we're going to tell them that their site's going to be closed for 8 weeks, we also need to offer them alternatives to keep them as happy as possible. And then in construction, what sort of activities might we be able to do whilst the building works are taking place?
We've got F and Eve. So obviously in the previous stage, we developed the training for staff. Now we're going to deliver training. Mark with P. B. So P is assure the asset during commissioning complete. We've got I. Eve. Yep. Just move on. Or probably now. Sorry, it's my side.
And then I think the answer to the final four.
Yeah, I think I'll make you type that in the chat. That would be a bit cool. But yeah, we'll show you these are the 4 that would typically take place post construction prior to day 1.
And I think this is the point in the process where it's often we need to keep our stakeholders happy, particularly if we've committed to a rough opening date. But we always say in operational readiness, it's about state, not date. So if we've not passed the trials and we don't have evidence to say that the site can be evacuated safely, then we're not in a position to open. And through going through a managed process and having early warnings about through this sort of testing and trialing period, we can hopefully minimize the likelihood of any showstoppers happening at the 12th hour. And the writing of robust processes and development of according training should again further help to minimize any likelihood of that. Obviously, there are always unforeseen things that do crop up, but if those have been addressed in a systematic way earlier in the process, then that can limit that. So this particular site, just to close the exercise, it opened a day late, which isn't too bad. But there were assets that actually weren't fully up and running at that point of time, like the AMPR wasn't correctly configured, for example. Some of the signs weren't correctly installed. So on that basis, had they applied an operational readiness procedure, perhaps they might have been able to resolve a few of those issues before opening date. But obviously, the ultimate drive here was to give the end users the site to access as soon as possible to limit impacts to them and obviously reduce any reputational damage to the council. So a sort of a semi-success in this case, I think.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a bit of a recap what we've covered today. So we've looked at what is operational readiness. It's the key to successful project execution. We've looked at when we should consider operational readiness. So obviously local public reopenings and redevelopments are key, particularly in this context. We've looked at why we should invest time and resources into operational readiness, because it's a successful introduction of change with positive perception, minimize cost and delays. And then we've looked at what does operational readiness look like. So it's a well-managed program with connected leadership and clear responsibilities and action.